South Carolina will use an illegal congressional map for the 2024 elections because of the Supreme Court's delay in ruling on the issue. Black voters will be forced to vote yet again under a map that a federal court ruled to be an unconstitutional racial gerrymander that intentionally discriminates against Black voters. In January of 2023, a panel of 3 federal judges ruled that the state's first congressional district, which is currently held by Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace, illegally moved over 30,000 Black voters out of the district, violating the 14th and 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. You may know Mace from being one of the 8 Republicans who voted to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, or from this. Republicans appealed this decision to the Supreme Court, and SCOTUS heard oral argument in this case on October 11th. Both parties asked the court to rule by January 1st to ensure ample time for a new map to be implemented if need be. It is now the end of March, and still nothing has been issued yet from the Supreme Court. Because of this delay, South Carolina Republicans have now argued that it is too close to the election for a new map, regardless of how the Supreme Court rules. Today, as a direct result of the Supreme Court's months-long delay in ruling in this case, the same federal court that struck down the map now ruled that the state must use that map for the upcoming November elections. The lower court said today that the present circumstances make it plainly impractical for the court to adopt the new map at this point, because the deadline for absentee ballots to be sent to military and overseas voters is April 27th, and the primaries are on June 11th. The court acknowledges that it is incredibly unusual for a court to allow an election to proceed under a map that it itself ruled to be an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Writing, but with the primary election procedures rapidly approaching, the appeal before the Supreme Court still pending, and no remedial plan in place, the ideal must bend to the practical. Let's be clear, there is absolutely no reason for the Supreme Court to have delayed its decision this long. Both the state of South Carolina and Black voters in the NAACP asked the court for a ruling by January 1st. And between when this case was heard in October and now, the Supreme Court has heard and ruled in other cases in a shorter time frame. Let's also not forget what's at stake when the court does finally decide to issue its final opinion. Depending on how the court rules, it could upend protections against racial gerrymandering across the entire country. South Carolina wants the Supreme Court to gut the 14th Amendment's protections against racial gerrymandering by imposing a near impossible standard to prove a violation. Democracy Docket is tracking 16 lawsuits challenging congressional, legislative, and local districts as racial gerrymanders under the 14th Amendment. If the Supreme Court rules in South Carolina's favor, all of these cases could be at risk. Of course, this isn't the first time this far-right Supreme Court has been involved in forcing voters to cast their ballots under illegal maps. In February of 2022, the Supreme Court granted Alabama Republicans' request to allow the midterm elections to continue under a congressional map ruled to violate the Voting Rights Act by diluting Black voting power. Justice Kavanaugh suggested in a concurring opinion that it was too late in the election cycle to implement a new map. And in a similar case out of Louisiana, the Supreme Court also allowed the 2022 elections to proceed under a map that was also ruled to violate the Voting Rights Act. Thankfully, the court sided with voters when it issued its final opinion in the case in the summer of 2023 and required Alabama to redraw its congressional map to add a second majority Black district. Louisiana soon also followed suit, and both states now have a congressional map that has 2 majority Black districts that comply with the Voting Rights Act. But the damage of forcing voters to cast their ballots under illegal congressional maps in 2022 had already been done and helped Republicans take the House. The Supreme Court can issue its final opinion on South Carolina's congressional map and the 14th Amendment's racial gerrymandering protections any day now. We'll see how the court rules. Thanks for watching Democracy Docket. If you want to stay up to date on the latest voting and election news in the courts, make sure to sign up for our newsletters. You can click the link on the screen or in the post description of this video. I'm Sophie, and I'll see you next time.